I stood motionless in the vast cathedral, the air so heavy it felt like it was suffocating me. My hands gripped the edge of the polished oak pew in the very back row, knuckles white from the pressure. Before me lay my father's coffin, Lennox Marlowe, the once all-powerful steel industry billionaire who had ruled a colossal business empire for decades. He had died at 70, and now he lay there, motionless in an immaculate black suit, his face pale beneath the thick layer of makeup that Miranda had no doubt personally supervised. My name is Oliver Marlowe, 36 years old, his eldest son, yet I was the one the family had disowned 8 years ago. I stood here, not in the front row reserved for loved ones, but tucked away in the shadows like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. The funeral was ostentatiously lavish, almost grotesque in its extravagance. Every detail had been orchestrated to perfection by my stepmother, Miranda Marlowe, to flaunt the new power she had just seized. At 55, the former supermodel turned PR director of my father's own conglomerate was sharp, cunning, and hungry for control above all else. Today she stood in the front row in a form-fitting black dress that still showed off a surgically sculpted figure, hair pulled into a severe chignon, lips painted blood red. She did not cry. Or if she did, the tears were expertly manufactured. Instead, a faint, triumphant smile played at the corners of her mouth, the smile of someone who had just won the final move in a very long game. Most of the mourners were prominent businessmen, major shareholders in Marlowe Industries and media lurking discreetly at a distance. They whispered among themselves, eyes darting between my quiet, grieving figure and the icy composure of Miranda and Preston, my younger half-brother. Preston sat beside his mother, 29 years old, baby-faced yet perpetually smug and condescending. He wore an exorbitantly expensive suit with the top 2 buttons casually undone, a Patek Philippe glinting on his wrist with every movement. He smirked at me, eyes gleaming with victory. I could not cry. Tears welled up, then stopped at the corners of my eyes, choking in my chest like pain with no escape. The cloying scent of white lilies from the casket filled the air, mingling with polished wood and the cathedral's cold stone. Everything felt staged, more theater than farewell. The service began with solemn ritual. The priest's voice echoed from the high pulpit reading scripture, but I barely heard a word. My mind drifted to distant memories, my eyes fixed on my father's face. His hands were folded over his chest, those thin, once powerful fingers that had signed billion-dollar deals and once struck me across the face when I was 28 for daring to expose embezzlement inside the company. Now they were cold and still forever. Then Miranda took the podium. She walked slowly, her high heels clicking deliberately on the marble floor, the sound reverberating through the vast space. The entire cathedral fell instantly silent, every gaze locked on her. She grasped the microphone, drew a dramatic breath, the practiced inhale of a seasoned performer, and turned fully toward me, her eyes cutting like knives straight into my heart. "Dear friends," her voice rang out smooth and artificially warm. "Today we gather to bid farewell to a legend of American steel, a great man. Lennox Marlowe, my husband, the father, and of some of us here." She paused deliberately, letting the phrase hang in the air so everyone understood exactly whom "some of us" referred to. Whispers rippled through the pews. Heat rushed to my ears. My face burned despite the cathedral's chill. "The Marlowe empire he built will not end," Miranda continued, her voice rising with confidence. "From this moment it turns a new page, a cleaner page, a stronger page, and most importantly, a page free of the stains of the past." Down in the front row, Preston let out a short, scornful laugh. He stood and clapped. A few others politely followed, enough for the sound to pierce me like shrapnel. Miranda kept her eyes locked on me, microphone steady in her manicured hand. "Oliver," she said my name as if spitting out something bitter. "Lennox's eldest son, or rather former son. I believe everyone here knows he was disowned by his father 8 years ago, for reasons I'm sure I don't need to repeat." The whispers grew louder. Reporters covertly raised cameras. Shutters clicked furiously. My insides burned as if on fire. "You came here today," Miranda went on, voice dripping with venomous sweetness. Not to mourn your father, did you, Oliver? You came to see what scraps you might pick from his vast estate. Unfortunately for you, your father was very clear with me before he passed. Miranda, if Oliver shows his face, throw him out. I have no traitor for a son. It was the most brazen lie I had ever heard. I knew the truth, but I could not speak it. Speaking now would only make everything worse. Preston chimed in, voice shrill and triumphant. That's right, big brother. Dad disowned you ages ago. You're just here to beg, aren't you? Go back to your little woodworking shop and build coffins for other people. Laughter erupted throughout the cathedral, not from everyone, but from enough to feel like 1,000 needles piercing my skin. Miranda raised a hand for silence, then concluded in a voice that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. So, if you have any shred of dignity left, leave now. Do not further soil my husband's funeral or the Marlowe family name. I looked at my father one last time. Really looked. His face was so calm, as if merely asleep. I wanted to rush forward, to touch him, to scream that I still loved him even though he had chosen them over me. But I could not. I turned and walked away, the rows of mourners parting like the Red Sea before a leper. No one met my eyes. Some looked pitying. Some looked contemptuous. Some simply enjoyed the drama. Outside the cathedral doors, I stopped beneath the ancient elm whose shade seemed to shield a piece of the world from view. I could not take another step. From a distance across the cold gray stone courtyard, I watched the gravediggers slowly lower my father's casket into the earth. Clods of dirt began to fall, each thud striking my chest like a hammer. Miranda stood at the edge of the grave, face contorted with theatrical tears, hand pressed to her heart as if in unbearable agony. Preston draped an arm around his mother's shoulders, clutching her tightly, playing the role of the devastated son to perfection. The crowd bowed their heads, completely convinced by their performance. And I, excluded from that picture as if I had never belonged. The scene continued before me, solemn, ostentatious, and ice-cold, with no place for me in my father's final moment. The cold wind blew past, carrying the scent of fresh earth and wilting lilies. I closed my eyes, and the memories flooded back like an unstoppable tide. I was 6 years old when everything began to shatter. I still remember the day my mother collapsed on the kitchen floor. She was making tomato soup. The smell of scorched tomatoes is burned into my memory even now. She clutched her chest, eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound came out. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the little wooden doll she had carved for me just the day before. She looked at me, tried to smile, then fell. Her heart stopped before the ambulance arrived. They said it was a ruptured aortic aneurysm, sudden, painless. But I have been in pain for more than a decade. After Mom's funeral, the big house became terrifyingly silent. My father, Lennox Marlowe, then only 43, handsome, powerful, successful, disappeared into endless meetings. He came home after midnight smelling of strange women's perfume on his suit jackets. I lay curled up in my room, hugging the wooden doll Mom had left me, listening to him quietly close his bedroom door as if afraid to wake something that had already died long ago. Then Miranda appeared, only 4 months after Mom was buried. She walked in with a bright red Louis Vuitton suitcase, a tight dress hugging her figure, golden hair shining, and a dazzling Hollywood smile. Dad introduced her as the woman who will bring light back to this house. I stood on the staircase, gripping the banister, watching her lean down and kiss his cheek as if she had owned the place for years. From that day on, I became the extra. Miranda was sweet in front of Dad. She cooked, giggled at his company stories, rubbed his back when he was tired. But whenever we were alone, her eyes turned to ice. Go play somewhere else, Oliver. Don't get under Mommy's feet. She claimed my mother's title in days. I never once called her that. When Preston was born, it was officially over. The baby cried in the sky-blue nursery that used to be my playroom. Miranda carried him around the house, singing lullabies, kissing him, posting photos on Facebook. Dad smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in months. He lifted Preston high and said, "This is my true heir." He meant it as a joke, but I heard every word. By age 10, I already knew I was the outsider. They compared everything. Preston got a 90 in math. Miranda bragged everywhere. I got 100, she said, that's normal. Preston had a slight cold. The whole house panicked. I ran a 102 fever and lay alone in my room, only the old maid bringing me porridge. Dad was in Europe closing deals and texted, "You're a big boy now, you can take care of yourself." I learned to be quiet, learned not to cry in front of anyone, learned to stay up late studying, to wash my own clothes, to cook when I was hungry. I grew tall, fast, broad-shouldered, stone-faced. No one dared bully me at school. But at home, I was still the 6-year-old watching his mother fall. At 18, the day I received a full scholarship to engineering school, I packed my things and left without saying goodbye. Dad was in Dubai. Miranda texted, "Good luck. Try not to disappoint us any further." I replied with one word, "Yes." 7 years later, at 25, I came back. I had graduated with honors, had a steady job at a small firm, but something nameless still ached for my father. I thought maybe he missed me too. Maybe time had made him see. I wore my best suit, walked into Marlowe Tower, and asked to see him. He received me in the big boardroom, Miranda at his side, Preston, then 18, lounging with his legs crossed. Dad looked me up and down and asked, "What do you want?" Not "you're back" or "how are you?" Just, "What do you want?" I said I wanted to work at the company, to be closer to him. He smirked. "Fine. Start in the basement archives. Do well and maybe you'll move up." Miranda smiled. Preston laughed out loud. I accepted. I worked like a madman, 15-hour days, weekends too. I found errors in financial reports, fixed them without complaint. I proposed production improvements that saved millions. Slowly I rose to planning, then operations. I thought I was proving my worth. I thought he would eventually look at me differently. I was wrong. At 28, I accidentally opened a hidden folder on his computer. Ghost expenses, shell companies in the Caymans, tax evasion schemes so sophisticated they made my blood run cold. I printed everything and confronted him in his office at midnight. The fight exploded like a bomb. I shouted that he was destroying everything he had built. He slammed the desk and roared that I was naive, that this is how you survive in the real world. I said I would go to the authorities. He laughed. "You'd destroy your own family?" Miranda walked in right then. She didn't need to hear the whole story. She put an arm around Dad and whispered something in his ear. The next morning I was fired. Not a normal dismissal. He called security, stood watching while I packed my things in front of the entire staff, and announced loudly so everyone could hear, "Oliver Marlowe is no longer part of this family. He is no longer my son." I walked out of Marlowe Tower carrying a cardboard box, rain pouring down. I didn't cry. I had run out of tears long ago. After that, I started over, truly from zero. I did any job I could find. Laborer on construction sites, plumber, long-haul truck driver. My hands grew calloused. My back ached every morning, but my heart felt strangely light. For the first time in my life, I was free of the shadow called Marlowe. Then I met Amelia. She walked into my makeshift woodworking shop to repair an antique chair. She wore an oversized sweater, hair in a ponytail, and smiled so gently I forgot to greet her. She didn't know who I was, didn't know I had once been a Marlowe heir. She just looked at the scars on my hands and asked, "How long have you been working with wood? You have beautiful hands." We fell in love fast, like wildfire. Amelia never pried about my past until I was ready to tell her. She simply held me on nights I woke from nightmares. She gave me Lillian, our little girl with her mother's green eyes and my smile. The first time I held my daughter, I cried like a child in that delivery room where it was just the three of us. I opened a proper woodworking shop on the outskirts of town. I built every table, every cabinet with my own hands meticulously. I never lied to customers, never cut corners on materials, never chased dirty profits. I refused to repeat my father's mistakes. Customers came more and more, not because I was a Marlowe, but because my work was solid, beautiful, and I was a craftsman who kept his word. Our life wasn't wealthy, but it was peaceful in a way I had never known. Every morning opening the shop, every evening holding Lillian and hearing Amelia laugh, I felt my heart grow lighter. I slowly learned to treasure those small moments and to live a life no longer covered by the Marlowe shadow. Until one late night, just 3 weeks before the news of my father's death spread everywhere. That night the rain poured relentlessly, drumming on the tin roof of the woodworking shed next to the house like thousands of fingers tapping on the window. Amelia was sleeping soundly beside me, and Lillian was breathing evenly in the nursery. I was lying in bed reading under the dim yellow bedside lamp when my phone suddenly vibrated. The screen glowed green in the darkness, displaying a completely unfamiliar number. It was almost 2 in the morning. I hesitated for a few seconds, my thumb hovering over the reject button, but something twisted in my chest, an icy, indistinct premonition. The kind you only feel once in a lifetime, like a warning of something monumental about to happen. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello?" My voice was hoarse from sleep and worry. There was a long silence on the other end, only heavy, rasping breathing like an old bellows. Then a voice spoke, a voice I recognized instantly, though it was weak, trembling. Barely human anymore, nothing like the commanding tone of the powerful man who once made the entire business world bow. "Oliver, is that you, son?" I bolted upright, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. "Dad, is that you? Where are you?" His voice came in broken fragments, each word seeming to cost him his last strength. "Listen to me, Oliver. Find the butler. Mr. Harris. He knows the truth. Hurry, son." "Dad, where are you? What's happening? Tell me." But all I heard was labored breathing, then a terrible fit of coughing, as if he were choking on unbearable pain. "Don't trust them. Oliver, I was wrong." The call cut off abruptly, as if someone had yanked the cord from the wall. I frantically redialed. The phone rang endlessly into the night. No answer. Second time, third time, straight to cold voicemail. On the 4th try, the phone was completely powered off. No trace, no connection. I sat frozen on the bed, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the lifeless dial tone echo in the darkness. My heart felt like ice water had been poured into it. That voice. It was no longer the voice of Lennox Marlowe, who once stood at the pinnacle of power and made me tremble with a single shout in the boardroom. It was the voice of a dying old man, desperate, reaching out in the dark for the son he had abandoned for years. Amelia woke up when I turned on the bedside lamp. She rubbed her eyes, voice groggy. "What's wrong, honey? Who's calling this late?" I couldn't answer right away. I just shook my head, throat choked. My dad called." Amelia fell silent, then wrapped her arms around me from behind. She knew everything, knew I still hurt because of him, even though I never said it out loud. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the dark ceiling, my father's broken words looping in my head like a scratched record. "Find the butler. The truth. Don't trust them." I was wrong. Every time I recalled his wheezing, feeble voice, my throat tightened and tears silently fell. Something was very wrong. My father had never sounded weak like that. He was the man who could stand in a shareholders' meeting and roar until his face turned red. Not someone whispering for help in the dead of night. The next morning, as the sun barely rose after the night's rain, I was already speeding down the highway toward the Marlowe estate. The road was slick, thick fog blanketed everything, but I didn't care about the danger. The sense of impending disaster pressed on my chest, forcing me to drive faster, faster. I couldn't wait another minute. I couldn't let those unfinished words dissolve into nothing. The estate gates were ajar, strange. They were always secured with electronic locks. I parked right at the main entrance and jumped out without even closing the car door. As I crossed the polished marble steps, Preston was already blocking my way, arms crossed, face twisted in smug defiance. Well, big brother's back? he sneered, voice shrill and arrogant. Heard Dad's seriously ill and came running to sniff around for money? Too bad you're late. He disowned you years ago, remember? You were fired from the company, kicked out of the house, and now you dare show your face here? Get lost before I call security. I didn't even bother looking him in the eye. Step aside, Preston. I'm not saying it twice. Oh, still that tough guy tone? He stepped closer, coffee and cigarette breath hitting my face. You were fired from the company, thrown out of the house, and now you dare show up? Get lost before I call security. I brushed his arm aside, not violently, but firmly enough to make him stumble back. Rage boiled inside me, but I held it in. I only wanted to see my father, even for 1 minute, even just to look at him once. I pushed open the front door. The vast hallway was cold and sterile, reeking of disinfectant instead of the old scent of mahogany and leather. Miranda appeared instantly from the living room, flanked by 2 burly security guards. She wore a black silk robe, hair in a perfect bun, face bare of makeup yet still sharp as a blade. Oliver, my name sounded like a curse in her mouth. You've got some nerve. I told security to shoot you on sight if you ever came near. I want to see my father. I forced my voice to stay calm. Just a few minutes. Let me see him. Miranda smirked and stepped closer. The guards advanced a step. Your father cut you off 8 years ago. You are no longer a Marlowe. Lennox does not want to see you. He told me that himself yesterday. Another blatant lie. I knew it for certain. Just hours earlier he had called me gasping, pleading, but I said nothing. I could feel something dark and dangerous lurking behind the upstairs bedroom door. How is he? I asked, voice dropping with worry. Let me see him. Please. Miranda tilted her head, looking at me like an insect. He doesn't want to see you. He's very tired. Go home. Don't disturb him further. From the doorway, Preston cackled. Did you hear that, big brother? Dad doesn't want to see a traitor like you. The 2 guards moved in, one on each side, grabbing my arms. I could have fought. I was taller, stronger from years of woodworking. But I didn't. I only looked deep into Miranda's eyes. If anything happens to him, you will pay. She didn't blink, then ordered the guards to throw me out. They dragged me to the entrance. Preston stood farther back, phone raised, filming with a wide, mocking grin. The mansion doors slammed shut in my face. I stood in the courtyard under a light drizzle, fists clenched so tight they hurt. Doubt had turned into obsession. Something was terribly wrong inside that house. My father wasn't just sick. He was being imprisoned, silenced. The words he wanted to say still hung unfinished in the air like a thread about to snap. I got back in the car and drove home, heart heavy as lead. The entire way my father's voice echoed in my head. Find the butler. The truth. And I knew I had to uncover that truth, no matter the cost. I arrived home as the afternoon was fading. Emilia was cooking dinner. Lillian was playing with Lego on the rug. I held my daughter for a long time, letting the scent of milk and baby powder soothe the storm inside me a little. I told Emilia nothing, not yet. I only said I had gone to the mansion and been thrown out. She looked at me, worry in her eyes, but asked no more. She knew when I needed silence. That night, after Lillian was sound asleep and Emilia had drifted off, I sat alone in the workshop. The cold white neon light shone down on the pine planks waiting to be finished. I brewed a cup of thick black coffee, sat on the old wooden stool, and began piecing together the scattered fragments in my head. The midnight call. My father's voice so weak it was unrecognizable. The unfinished message about the butler Harris, the man who had served the Marlowe family since I was a toddler. Miranda and Preston blocking me without mercy. The strong smell of disinfectant in the mansion. The upstairs bedroom door sealed shut. All of it formed a dark picture reeking of conspiracy. I could no longer sit still. I opened my laptop and dug through old contacts. I called a college friend who now worked as a private investigator in Chicago. Ryan Keller, tall, quiet, but utterly reliable. I gave him the short version. I need you to watch the Marlowe estate. Find out my father's real condition. Absolute discretion. Money is no object. Ryan asked only one question. How dangerous is this? I answered, it could be life-threatening. He took the job the next day. 3 days dragged by like 3 years. I worked in the shop like a machine, sawing, planing, varnishing, but my mind was elsewhere. Every phone ring made my heart seize. On the 4th day, Ryan called. I stepped out to the backyard so Amelia wouldn't hear. Oliver, I have serious news. His voice low and urgent. I sat on the cold concrete step. Your father. He's in very bad shape. End-stage heart failure, barely breathing without machines. He's completely bedridden, can't speak clearly. His personal physician was fired 2 months ago. Now there are only nurses hired by Miranda, rotating constantly so no one stays too long. My throat went dry. But it gets worse, Ryan continued. Miranda controls everything. New cameras on every door, all security replaced with her own people. No one goes to the 2nd floor without her direct order. The old staff, even Maria the cook, 30 years of service, were all fired, replaced with new hires under ironclad NDAs. No one is allowed to bring a phone into the patient's room. My grip on the phone turned my knuckles white. Harris, the old butler, was fired a month ago. No reason given. Allowed to take only 1 suitcase. I whispered. My father. Is he being held prisoner? Ryan was silent for a few seconds. Yes, and more. Miranda is signing everything in your father's name. $100 million contracts, fund transfers, major shareholder restructurings. She's taken full control of the conglomerate while her husband lies there like a breathing corpse. My heart crashed to the ground. The image of my father, once standing on the Marlowe Tower rooftop, hands on hips, looking down at the city like a chessboard. Now completely isolated, dependent on that vicious woman, hurt so badly I could barely breathe. My eyes burned, but no tears came. They had frozen into a block of ice inside my chest. I asked Ryan, do you have proof? He replied, not enough for court yet. Only remote surveillance and a few inside sources. Miranda is covering her tracks very cleanly. I hung up and sat motionless in the yard until Amelia called me in for dinner. The following days were hell. I could do nothing. No evidence, no way into the mansion. They had it locked down. And legally, Miranda held all the medical and business power of attorney documents. The law was on her side. All I could do was sit by the window every night, phone in hand, staring at the blank screen, praying it would ring again, just once more, so I could ask everything, so I could rush to save him. But the screen stayed dark. Then one Tuesday morning, while I was planing a walnut board for a longtime customer, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Lennox Marlowe passed away at 4:17 a.m. Funeral arrangements to be announced later. The Marlowe family. No condolences, no details, nothing. I dropped the plane. It clattered to the floor with a dry crack. Amelia ran out when she saw me sitting on the ground, face ashen. She held me, but I felt nothing. My heart had shattered into pieces. No matter that he had disowned me, no matter that he had chosen them over me, I had never hated him. I only hurt because I never got to say I still loved him. The first tear fell when I realized that frail midnight call had been my father's last attempt to reach for me. And I hadn't understood in time. I hadn't saved him. On the day of the funeral, I stood far away under the old elm tree, watching my father's casket slowly lowered into the earth, watching Miranda weep for the cameras, watching Preston hold his mother, face impassive. I felt as if my entire ruined past was being buried with him. Every wound, every chance at reconciliation that never came, every unsaid word, all sinking into that cold grave. When the funeral ended and everyone had left, I walked quietly to the graveside. I knelt, placed my hand on the cold granite slab still smelling of fresh earth. I sat there for hours in silence, as if listening for the things my father never finished saying, as if waiting for him to reach up from the ground and take my hand one last time. Night fell. Darkness covered the cemetery. I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees. The cold wind carried the scent of wilted lilies and damp soil. I left the cemetery carrying a heavy sense of loss, yet at the same time a burning certainty blazed in my chest. My father's death was not simply illness. Behind it lay truths that had been hidden, buried with him. And I would dig them up, even if it cost me my entire life. The days after the funeral passed as if through fog. I worked in the workshop until I dropped, trying not to think, but every stroke of the plane, every cut of the saw brought back the image of my father lying motionless in his coffin. I didn't cry again. There was only a weight on my chest that grew heavier by the day. Then, on a Friday morning while I was making coffee in the kitchen, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with the Marlowe corporate area code. I answered. My heart missed a beat. "Hello, Oliver Marlowe speaking. Who is this?" A middle-aged man's voice, polite but ice-cold. "Good morning, Mr. Marlowe. This is Malcolm Pierce, Chief Counsel representing Marlowe Industries in the estate of Mr. Lennox Marlowe. I'm calling to inform you that the formal reading of Mr. Lennox Marlowe's last will and testament will take place next Monday at 10 a.m. in the 68th floor boardroom of Marlowe Tower. Your presence is required. By the terms of the will itself." I was silent for several seconds. "Required? After everything?" "I'll be there," I answered, voice rough. Malcolm Pierce hung up without another word. I set the phone down, hand trembling slightly. A fragile, foolish spark of hope flickered inside me. Maybe Dad had remembered me after all. Maybe he had left me something, even just a written apology. I decided to go, even knowing I was walking straight into the lion's den. On Monday, I wore the only suit left in my closet, the dark gray one I'd bought for my wedding to Amelia. I kissed my wife and daughter goodbye, lying that I had a big client meeting. Amelia looked at me for a long time. She understood everything without a word. She just hugged me tightly and whispered, "Come home to me, no matter what happens." Marlowe Tower still towered into the sky, black glass gleaming in the morning sun. I walked into the lobby feeling as if I had been thrown 8 years back in time, to the day I was thrown out carrying a cardboard box. The elevator took me to the 68th floor. The doors opened onto the crimson-carpeted hallway. The familiar scent of leather and sandalwood hit me. I walked down the corridor, leather shoes barely making a sound on the thick carpet, each step making my heart beat harder. The doors to the main boardroom stood open. I stepped inside. Miranda sat at the head of the long table, black dress clinging to her body, hair in a severe bun, arms folded with absolute confidence. Preston sat to her right, legs crossed, phone in hand, lips curled in a sneer the moment he saw me. Malcolm Pierce sat at the far end, thick folders in front of him, face expressionless. Only the four of us in a room large enough for 100. Preston spoke first, voice shrill and triumphant. "Well, well, big brother showed up after all. Came sniffing for money? Save your time, you're getting nothing. Go back to making chairs for people." Miranda said nothing, only shook her head slightly, a cold smile playing at the corner of her mouth. She looked me up and down as if to say, "How dare you dirty this room with your presence?" I didn't reply. I simply pulled out the chair at the far end of the table and sat, back straight, face calm. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. Malcolm Pierce cleared his throat and opened the folder. "We will begin. This is the last will and testament of Mr. Lennox Marlowe, executed and notarized on October 14th of this year, bearing his signature and those of 2 witnesses." I clenched my fists under the table. The lawyer began reading in a flat, mechanical voice. "All controlling shares in Marlowe Steel Corporation, real estate holdings in New York, the Hamptons, Aspen, and Miami, together with all investment funds, charitable trusts, and personal bank accounts, are transferred in full ownership to Mrs. Miranda Marlowe and Mr. Preston Marlowe in a 60-40 split." Preston smirked and flashed a victory sign at his mother. Malcolm turned to the final page. With respect to Mr. Oliver Marlowe, my eldest son, he is to receive no inheritance of any kind in any form." The words struck me like an ice-cold blade straight through the chest. Miranda smiled in triumph and tilted her head at me. "Your father did the right thing until the very end, Oliver." Preston burst out laughing and slapped the table. "Hear that, big brother? Not a single cent. Now you know your place. Get out fast before you dirty the chair any longer." I sat frozen. Not because of the money, I had never wanted his money, but because of the feeling of being disowned by my own father one final time, now in writing, before the two people who had always treated me like a stain. I looked Miranda straight in the eye. She stared back, her gaze glittering with cruel joy. I stood, the chair scraping loudly on the hardwood floor. Without a word, I turned and walked out. The door closed behind me with a heavy thud. The long hallway, the endless elevator ride down, never had it felt so slow. Only when I reached the lobby did I realize I was shaking. Not from fear, from rage, from pain. The feeling of being betrayed one last time by the man I had always loved despite his rejection, it was suffocating. On the drive home, I was a ghost behind the wheel. One question spun endlessly in my head. Why did he treat me like this? When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car in the driveway, staring at our little house. Warm yellow light spilling from the windows, Emilia setting the table, Lillian dancing around her. I sat there until night fell completely. When I finally walked in, Emilia took one look at me and knew everything. She asked nothing. She just held me tight. I sat alone in my office until midnight. I pulled out the paper where I had written down every detail I remembered from Dad's last call. His frail voice, the broken sentences, the warning to find Harris. The final words, "Don't trust them." Everything contradicted the will I had just heard. The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. My father could not have been that cruel in his final moments. He could not have handed everything to the two people who had imprisoned him without leaving even one line for me. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. And I would uncover it even if I had to tear the entire empire apart to bring it into the light. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the workshop until dawn, with only the cold white neon light and the smell of sawdust for company. In my head, there was just one lead left. Mr. Harris, the butler who had served the Marlowe family since before I was born. Ryan had reported that he was fired under suspicious circumstances, no reason given, just overnight. If my father wanted me to find him, then Harris definitely knew something. The next morning, I called Ryan again. "Find Mr. Harris's address for me. Whatever it takes." Less than 2 hours later, Ryan texted, "A small house on the northern outskirts of Chicago in an old retirement neighborhood." I kissed Emilia and Lillian goodbye, lying that I had to deliver a table to a distant client. Emilia looked at me for a long time, eyes full of worry, but she only nodded and whispered, "Be careful, love." I drove for 3 hours, through empty highways and late autumn cornfields turning yellow and brittle. The house appeared at the end of a dirt road, a single-story wooden cottage with a steep roof, peeling white paint, and a front yard with only a few withered rose bushes. I parked, took a deep breath, and knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Mr. Harris stood there, hair snow-white, back more stooped than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp and sorrowful. He wore an old sweater and held a smoking cigarette. When he saw me, there was no surprise on his face, only a look of long-awaited recognition, as if he had known this day would come years ago. His voice was hoarse with age. "Oliver, come in, son." I stepped inside. The air was warm, smelling of freshly baked cookies and old wood. The house was tiny, just a living room with a fireplace and a few faded photographs on the walls. Dad in his younger days, me as a toddler, the whole family before everything fell apart. Mr. Harris pointed to the worn armchair by the fire. "Sit down. Tea?" I shook my head. I couldn't wait any longer. I went straight to the point. "Mr. Harris, my father called me the night before he died. He said, 'Find you. You would tell me the truth.'" Mr. Harris's face suddenly crumpled. He set his teacup down with trembling hands and sat across from me. He was silent for a very long time, as if wrestling with the most painful memory of his life. I waited, afraid to push. Finally, he sighed, voice shaking. "I've been waiting for you since the day they threw me out. I knew you would come sooner or later." And he began to tell me that ever since my father's heart failure became severe, he could barely care for himself. He was bedridden, on oxygen, speech difficult. Miranda immediately seized control. She replaced all the old staff, installed cameras everywhere, forbade anyone from going to the second floor without her direct order. Everything, medicine, food, schedule, had to follow her orders, Mr. Harris said, staring into the fire. Anyone who disobeyed was fired on the spot. Maria, who cooked for the family for 30 years, was dismissed. The old nurse, too. Only new people remained, people who only knew how to obey. He told me my father was treated coldly, even cruelly. Miranda often entered the room to scold him, calling him a burden, blaming him for letting the company weaken. She forced him to sign documents, transfer of operating authority, financial powers of attorney, and most importantly, a new will. Preston was worse, Mr. Harris said through clenched teeth. He hardly visited, only showed up when a signature was needed. He shouted in your father's face, called him a useless old man. Once he hit him. I saw it through the crack in the door. Your father couldn't fight back. He just lay there and took it. When Dad stubbornly refused to sign the fake will they presented, the one giving everything to Miranda and Preston, the real coercion began. Food rations cut, pain medication doses reduced. They let him suffer, let him weaken, hoping he would give in. His final days were hell, Mr. Harris whispered, voice breaking. He was utterly alone in the house he had built. No friends, no relatives allowed in. Only Miranda and Preston, the two people he had trusted most, circling him like vultures. He paused to wipe tears with a trembling hand. That last night, after the house was asleep, I slipped into his room. He lay there, eyes wide open, gasping. I knew he was slipping away. I gave him my phone. I said, "Call Oliver, sir. This is your last chance." He took it with shaking hands and dialed from memory. I stood outside the door, keeping watch. Mr. Harris looked straight into my eyes, tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. He only managed a few words. Then Miranda woke up and discovered us. She didn't hear the conversation, but it was enough to know what I had done. She called security and had me thrown out at 3 in the morning. I only had time to grab one suitcase. I never got to say goodbye. I sat there, frozen. Everything around me seemed to collapse. The image of my father, the man who once made the entire business world tremble, being abused, beaten, starved of medicine simply because he refused to sign papers. My chest ached as if someone were crushing my heart. I trembled, not from fear, from rage. Rage so fierce I wanted to scream, wanted to storm the mansion right then and strangle both mother and son. "Son," Mr. Harris placed a hand on my shoulder. "He loved you. Until his very last moment, he loved you. He told me many times, I was wrong to drive Oliver away. He's the only honest one in this house." He wanted to make amends, but it was too late. Tears poured from my eyes. I couldn't hold them back anymore. I bowed my head, shoulders shaking with sobs. That broken midnight call wasn't just a farewell. It was the final plea of a father I had always wanted to forgive, no matter how deeply he had hurt me. I understood everything now. In that moment in Mr. Harris's small, warm house, amid the smell of cookies and the crackling fire, I swore I would bring every truth into the light, not just for my own justice, but to restore the final dignity of a father who died in loneliness and agony. I would make Miranda and Preston pay by any means necessary. After recounting every painful truth he had witnessed, Mr. Harris fell silent and looked at me for a long time. His eyes carried a deep, lingering remorse, as if he had borne that burden for months and was only now able to set a part of it down. He said nothing more, only let out a heavy sigh and slowly rose. He limped into the small room at the back of the house, a cramped bedroom with a simple bed and an old wooden dresser. I waited, heart pounding with anticipation, hearing drawers being pulled open and the rustle of papers in the quiet. A moment later, he returned to the living room carrying a thick brown envelope, carefully sealed with old tape and a cracked red wax seal. Mr. Harris approached and placed the envelope in my hands with solemn reverence. His eyes were heavy with affection and duty, as though he were entrusting me with the final truth my father had been unable to speak before he left this world forever. "Your father gave me this a long time ago," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "He told me to give it to you only if you came looking. I've guarded it like my own life." I held the envelope, feeling its weight, not just paper, but my father's last legacy. I hugged Mr. Harris tightly, whispered my heartfelt thanks, and drove home. The whole long drive, the envelope sat quietly on the passenger seat, and I kept glancing at it, afraid it was a dream that might vanish at any moment. My heart was filled with a mixture of dread and fierce hope. This might be the key to every secret my father had left behind, the answer to all the doubts that had tormented me. I arrived home very late. Emilia and Lillian were already sound asleep in the warm bedroom. Not wanting to wake anyone, I turned on only the small desk lamp with its dim yellow glow in my private study. I sat in the familiar wooden chair, placed the envelope on the table, and took a deep breath to steady myself. My hands trembled slightly as I used a letter opener to carefully cut the old seal. Inside were 3 items neatly arranged, 2 thick bundles of documents tied with worn cord, and a single letter wrapped separately in time-yellowed brown paper, folded with great care. I opened the first bundle first, and I froze. It was my father's true will, professionally drafted, bearing his shaky but unmistakable signature, notarized by Madeline Shaw, the trusted family attorney he had relied on since I was a child, someone Miranda had never been able to manipulate. The contents were the complete opposite of the forged will Malcolm Pierce had read aloud. The entire vast estate, Marlowe Steel Corporation controlling shares, real estate across New York, the Hamptons, Aspen, and Miami, all investment funds and personal bank accounts, was legally transferred to me, Oliver Marlowe, as the eldest son and sole worthy heir. Miranda and Preston were to receive only a modest annual allowance sufficient for a comfortable but not extravagant life, with strict conditions prohibiting any interference in the company. I turned to the second bundle, and my heart raced faster than ever. It was a thick dossier of corporate wrongdoing my father had secretly compiled. Hundreds of photocopied pages, invoices, emails, internal reports, exposing sophisticated money laundering through Cayman shell companies, shady tax evasion deals, illegal contracts with dark partners, even steel smuggling operations from wartime. Each page hit me like a blow, leaving me reeling. But in the margins were tiny handwritten notes in my father's hand. "Must stop this now. Fix it before it's too late. Give everything to Oliver. He's the only one who can." My father had been preparing to face the darkness he himself had once hidden, planning to right his monumental wrongs, but Miranda and Preston had taken complete control and imprisoned him until death. Finally, with shaking hands, I opened the letter wrapped in old brown paper. The sheet was yellowed with age, the handwriting trembling from a hand already too weak, yet still carrying the careful strength of the father I once knew, the man who always tried to appear unbreakable no matter the circumstance. The letter left me speechless, as if the entire world had suddenly stopped. In it, my father apologized, truly, deeply apologized, for driving me away 8 years ago in blind rage, for letting Miranda manipulate him for so long, for lacking the courage to protect his own son from their vicious schemes. He confessed that in his final years he had lived in endless torment, looking back at every mistake, abandoning me after Mom died, letting Miranda and Preston dominate, allowing the Marlowe empire to become a corrupt, greedy machine. He wrote that he had realized too late the poisonous greed of Miranda and Preston and the terrible danger of leaving his life's work to them. He feared they would destroy everything, turning the empire he had built with blood, sweat, and youth into a tool for their bottomless avarice. But most importantly, the letter revealed his absolute faith in me. He wrote that my honesty, courage, and kind heart were the last light left to redeem the Marlowe name. He entrusted everything to me, not out of blood obligation, but because he believed only I could repair the damage he had left behind. Only I could bring back the transparency and integrity he no longer had time to restore. The final lines made me sob uncontrollably. He admitted he was unworthy of my forgiveness, that he only wished for me to live in peace with my wife and daughter, the granddaughter he never met, even though he was no longer in this world. The letter slipped from my hands and landed softly on the wooden desk. Tears poured freely, falling onto the now blurred ink, mingling with the dried words from months ago like a belated reconciliation. In that moment, I had found my father again, the real father I had always longed for, yet lost him forever in the same agonizing instant. In that quiet room, under the gentle glow of the lamp, I understood this was not just an ordinary will. It was a deathbed confession, a late repentance from the depths of his soul, and above all, proof that the love between father and son had never truly died, even when buried beneath years of coldness and misunderstanding. And now the responsibility was entirely mine. I would use it to claim justice, for my father, for myself, and for the real family I now had. I sat there until sunrise, eyes burning but my heart ablaze with a fire I had never known before. I was no longer the man who had once been thrown out with a cardboard box in his arms. I was now the rightful heir, the keeper of the truth, and the one who would claim justice for my father. That same morning I called Madeline Shaw. She received me in her private office in downtown Chicago, an old, unpretentious building, nothing like Marlowe Tower, filled with law books and the scent of aged paper. Mrs. Shaw was over 70, silver hair in a tight bun, eyes still razor-sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. When I placed the envelope on her desk, she showed no surprise. She only sighed, adjusted her glasses, and said, "I've been waiting for your call for a very long time, Oliver." She examined every page, every signature, every seal. Then she looked up at me, eyes glistening. "This is the only legal will. Your father signed it in my presence when he was still fully lucid, about a year before his condition worsened. He told me, 'Madeline, if Miranda and Preston ever do anything, protect this for Oliver.' I've kept a certified copy in my safe ever since." She placed her hand over mine. "They forged the will, Oliver. And they killed him. Not with a knife, but slowly, deliberately." I nodded. The rage inside me had solidified into a cold, sharp blade. I thanked Mrs. Shaw, hugged her, and left her office with a full set of certified copies in my briefcase. The next step, I wanted to hear them admit it with their own mouths. That afternoon, I drove straight to the Marlowe estate. The automatic gates opened. The new guards recognized me through the cameras, now aware that the eldest young master was no longer someone they could stop. I parked right at the front entrance and stepped out with the briefcase in hand. The new staff, unfamiliar faces, bowed and stepped aside as I walked through the hallway. The air in the house was thick, still carrying the lingering smell of disinfectant, now mixed with another scent: fear. Miranda and Preston were in the grand living room. They sat on the Italian leather sofa, sipping afternoon tea as if savoring their final victory. When I walked in, both looked up. Preston spoke first, sneering, Well, the beggar's back. Came sniffing for money again, big brother? I'll toss you a few coins for coffee." Miranda folded her arms, lips curling in contempt. "Oliver, haven't you had enough of making trouble? Leave before I call the police." I didn't answer. I simply walked to the low coffee table between them, set the envelope down with a sharp thud, and said, voice unnaturally calm, "We need to talk." Preston laughed loudly. "Listen to him giving orders, Mom. The guy who got kicked out of the house thinks he's the boss now." But Miranda was sharper. She glanced at the envelope, then at me, and for the first time I saw her blink rapidly. I opened the envelope, took out the certified copy of the true will and my father's handwritten letter, and placed them on the table. This is my father's real will, signed in the presence of Madeline Shaw. Fully legal. Everything belongs to me. You two get only a modest living allowance." The air in the room snapped taut like an overstretched wire. Miranda shot to her feet, face crimson, slamming her hand on the table so hard the teacups rattled. "You're making this up. You lunatic." The real will was already read by Attorney Malcolm. "You think a few photocopies will scare me?" Preston stood behind her, face flushed with panic but still trying to sneer. "Exactly. A loser like you can only fake things. Get out before I smash your face." I said nothing. I simply slid my father's handwritten letter toward them. Miranda snatched it, scanned it, her face drained of color, as if all the blood had been sucked out. For one rare moment, her perfect mask cracked, her eyes shook. She tried to cover it with fury, but her voice wavered. "Fake. It's all fake." Preston ripped the letter from her hand and read a few lines. His face went from red to deathly white. The words, "I trust Oliver. Miranda and Preston are vicious and greedy," struck him like knives. He snapped completely, like a cornered animal. "No! Impossible!" He lunged at the documents on the table, grabbed them and tore them to shreds in a frenzy, paper flying like snow. "I'll rip it all. If I destroy everything, there's nothing left." I stood motionless, arms folded, watching him lose his mind without moving a muscle. When Preston stood panting, hands full of scraps, I said coldly, "What you just tore up were copies." That sentence was the killing shot. Miranda collapsed back onto the sofa, clutching her chest. She realized instantly. The battle she thought she had won from the start had completely collapsed. No escape. No more masks. Preston staggered back, face the color of a corpse, stammering, You can't. It's all fake." The room was suffocating. The stench of defeat, exposed greed, and desperation filled the air. I looked at them one last time, at the woman who had destroyed my family, at the half-brother who had beaten our father to death, and felt not a shred of pity. I turned and walked out, my voice ringing coldly through the silence. "Your reckoning has only just begun. The law will handle the rest." The mansion doors slammed shut behind me with a dry thud. I got in the car and drove away without looking back. This time I was not the man leaving with a cardboard box. I was the one returning to take everything back. I didn't wait any longer. That very night I met Mrs. Madeline Shaw again. We sat in her office until late, preparing a complete dossier. The true will, my father's handwritten letter, Mr. Harris's signed testimony, Ryan's report on the confinement, and an expert handwriting analysis proving the forgery Malcolm Pierce had used. Mrs. Shaw brought in Chicago's top criminal attorney. The next morning we filed with the Illinois Supreme Court. Estate dispute, document forgery, abuse of a vulnerable adult, and suspected homicide. The news spread like wildfire. Marlowe estate scandal. Eldest son accuses stepmother and half-brother of murder for inheritance. Bloomberg, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, all ran it on the front page. Marlowe's steel stock plunged 28% in a single day. The financial world buzzed. High society whispered behind champagne flutes. And I only wanted justice, not revenge, but real justice for my father. On the first day of trial, the federal courthouse in Chicago was packed so tightly extra security had to be called in. The gallery was full. Reporters crammed the corridors, cameras flashed non-stop. Investors, old shareholders, even people my father had once fired. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of the Marlowe empire. Miranda entered first. She still wore a tight black dress, hair in a severe bun, lips blood red, but her usual icy composure was cracked. Her eyes were no longer sharp. They darted, sleepless, afraid. Preston followed his mother, suit rumpled, tie crooked, face ashen, eyes shifting like a hunted animal. I entered last. I wore the same dark gray suit I had worn to the reading of the fake will. But this time I did not bow my head. I walked tall, shoulders broad, gaze steady. The years of loneliness, the nights of silent tears, the days of manual labor until my hands bled, They had forged me into a man who had nothing left to lose and nothing left to fear. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Mrs. Shaw sat beside me and rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Today we win, Oliver." The trial began. Mrs. Shaw stood first. Her voice rang clear and unshaken. "Your Honor, Mr. Lennox Marlowe executed this true will on October 14th of last year in my presence and that of 2 independent witnesses. At that time, he was completely lucid despite his illness. He said to me, 'I want everything to go to Oliver, the only son I have left who still has integrity.' Forensic handwriting analysis was projected on the large screen. The signature on the forged will had been artificially recreated using AI with 99% accuracy. Malcolm Pierce, the attorney who read this fake will, was called to testify and immediately pleaded guilty to perjury in exchange for a reduced sentence. Then Mr. Harris was called to the stand. The old man walked slowly with his cane, but his voice was firm. He told everything: the imprisonment, the withholding of medicine, Miranda berating my father as a burden, Preston beating him until blood ran from his mouth simply because he refused to sign the fake will. He spoke with tears rolling down his face, but without a single tremor. "I served Mr. Marlowe for 43 years. I had never seen him so broken. He died alone in agony because of the greed of those 2 people." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled frantically. Miranda stared at the floor, knuckles white on the armrests. Preston shook uncontrollably, eyes red, not from remorse but from terror. Legally obtained hidden camera footage authorized by the court was played, Preston screaming in the sick room, "Sign it, old man. Refuse and I'll cut off all your pain meds and let you die." In the end, the court found Miranda and Preston guilty of will forgery, abuse of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy to misappropriate assets. Miranda was sentenced to 18 years in prison, ordered to repay every cent she had taken and to compensate for damages. Preston received 12 years plus 5 years probation upon release and was permanently stripped of any claim to Lennox's estate. American media called it the most humiliating collapse in U.S. high society history. Within 48 hours of the verdict, the entire estate was restored to me. I took control of Marlowe Industries the following week. I held no victory party. I simply walked into the 68th floor boardroom, stood exactly where my father once stood, and said one sentence to the old leadership: "From today, we start over. Either we do it honestly, or you resign." I audited every contract, every ghost expense, every offshore subsidiary. I fired more than 300 people, those who had taken bribes, signed dirty deals. I used part of the vast fortune to compensate hundreds of families harmed by Marlowe's substandard steel over the years. Collapsed houses, failed bridges, workplace accidents. I established a scholarship fund in my mother's name and a charitable foundation in my father's. Marlowe Industries is now a transparent company, environmentally responsible, highest wages in the industry, not a penny of tax evasion. I sold the old mansion and moved to a new house on the outskirts. Spacious green lawn, small pool, vegetable garden planted by Amelia's own hands. Lillian has her own room filled with wooden toys I made myself. We adopted a golden retriever named Hope. My life is truly peaceful now. I wake at 6, make coffee for Amelia, drive Lillian to school, then go to work. In the evenings, I hold my daughter, listen to her tell me how the teacher praised her drawing, hear Amelia laugh when I recount the day. I no longer have nightmares. I no longer wake in the night with a start. The truth has been laid bare before the law. Justice has been served, not just for me, but for my father. He has finally been given back his honor, even if only in headlines. Lennox Marlowe, victim of his own family. I often visit his grave. I sit there and tell him about Lillian, about Amelia, about the new company. I don't cry anymore. I only smile. I did it, Dad. Now I understand. Power and money can't buy peace. Only love can. And I know somewhere he is smiling too. After everything that happened, The sleepless nights, the silent tears, the years of loneliness, the days in court watching my enemies collapse. I came to a simple yet painfully sharp truth. Power and wealth were never the answer to happiness. They are only illusions. They blind people, make them trade away the most precious things, only to end up alone in a cold room, tortured to death by the very people closest to them. My father had everything: money, fame, a name that echoed across America. Yet he died in utter solitude. Miranda and Preston had everything within reach, yet they lost it all, left with nothing but prison walls and the contempt of the entire world. True happiness comes only from people. From Amelia's embrace every night, from Lillian's bright laughter as she runs barefoot across the grass, from the afternoons I spend in the workshop shaping the curves of a family dining table, knowing that tonight 3 people will sit around it, talking and laughing together. I once thought I was alone in my childhood because I was inadequate, because I wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy. Now I understand. It wasn't me who was wrong. It was that family. They chose ambition over love. They chose money over hugs. They chose power over listening to a child growing up in the void left by his mother. I was never the extra one. I was simply born into the wrong family. The fact that my father was coerced until his final breath is the deepest wound, but also the greatest lesson. Greed never knows when to stop. It is like fire. At first, just a small, comforting flame, but if left unchecked, it will burn down the entire forest. Miranda and Preston thought seizing the empire meant victory, but they had already lost the moment they forfeited their humanity. My father was once swept away by greed too, but at least he woke up before it was too late. They never did. And they paid with their freedom. I have learned forgiveness. Not to erase their crimes. Miranda and Preston's crimes will forever be recorded in law books and history. I forgive to free myself, so I no longer wake at midnight with clenched fists full of rage, so that when I hold Lillian, I pass on only the peace of the present, not the wounds I once carried. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength I have ever possessed. Now I give every spare moment to my wife and daughter. I take Lillian to the park, teach her to carve wood, tell her about the grandmother she never met. I listen to Amelia describe an ordinary day as if it were the best story in the world. I understand that the most precious legacy a father can leave is not money or a corporation. It is presence, unconditional love, the certainty that when a child runs home, Dad will always be there. I vow to raise Lillian the way I always wished I had been raised, with kindness, with listening, with absolute safety. Never comparing, never abandoning, never letting her feel like the extra one. I want her to grow up knowing her worth lies in her heart, not in a bank account. I run Marlowe Industries with total transparency. Financial reports clear to the last digit, every decision putting people and the planet before shady profits. I will not let my father's darkness or Miranda's shadow fall on the next generation. I want employees to look at me and see a decent leader, not a tyrant everyone bows to in fear. From my own life, I have learned one simple truth. Sometimes to defend what is right, you have to stand alone. I stood alone for a long time, at the funeral where I was humiliated, in the sleepless nights of doubt, in the courtroom when the world saw me as a madman. But it was in those moments of solitude that I was strongest. No one could buy me, no one could threaten me, because I had nothing left to lose, except the real family I built myself. I believe everyone has a moment that decides who they will become. My father had his, late, but he chose correctly. Miranda and Preston did not. They chose to sink deeper into darkness. And I chose light, even though it cost me the most painful years of my life. If you are reading these words while carrying the pain of family, abandonment, comparison, wounds inflicted by the very people who should have loved you, then hear me. Do not let the past chain your future. Your true worth does not lie in where you were born or the name on your birth certificate. It lies in how you choose to live, how you choose to love, how you choose to become a better person. Live upright, Keep your heart clean. Be kind even when the world is not kind to you. Because in the end, justice always finds its way, even if it sometimes has to take a very long detour.